Many moons ago, I worked at a cinema chain. Part of the deal was that in exchange for offering our blood, sweat, and humanity to the gods of inbound customer service phone calls, we were given 50-cent movie tickets. A generous discount for sure, but was it worth having my soul torn apart daily by people who were angry enough about stale popcorn to call a phone helpline? I'm going to say yes off the basis of one specific incident. I got to go and see Magic Mike XXL. That's the second installment of Magic Mike, for those of you not keeping track. Now, when I say I had not intended to see this movie, I really had not intended to see this movie. I'd gotten 20 minutes into the Steven Soderbergh directed first film and said, "This thinks it is profound, but it is in fact just sepia-toned," and I'd turned it off. But my friend and I stuffed up our timing, and the session of whatever we were going to see was full. As two fat lesbians already holding chalk tops, what were we to do? We made a snap decision, handed over our 50 cents, and trundled off to watch men take off their clothes in various exciting ways. I came out a changed woman. Still a fat lesbian, let's not go too far here, but I had maybe the best time I've ever had in a cinema, watching Channing Tatum and various other large men air hump things for 120 minutes. And I want to talk about it. I'm Alex, this is Pop Culture Boner, the podcast edition, and today I'm thinking about the life-altering work of art that is Magic Mike XXL. It's difficult to explain why I like this film so much. I am fully aware that, that introduction sounds like hyperbole, but I want to assure you, I am as serious as a heart attack. The first installment of Magic Mike is like hot garbage masquerading as sexy female gaze, and the second film says, "Hey, I see you, I love you, and I understand you. Also, I made you breakfast." The original Magic Mike, the lesser of the mics, if you will, is ostensibly about male strippers. But it's sort of about male strippers in the same way that, Boogie Nights is about porn stars. There are male strippers, and some of the elements of the drama are derived from the fact that they are male strippers, but it's actually about drugs. Try repeating that sentence back, thinking about Boogie Nights and saying porn stars instead of male strippers. It's the same thing. Anyway, that's fine and all, but for a film marketing itself as somehow being about the kind of lusty female yearning that punctuates the average hen's party, it's way too caught up in trying to seem authentic and kind of gritty. Magic Mike XXL manages to actually make it about male strippers. Male strippers on a buddy road trip for one final bump and grind before quitting their dream job for their other not stripping related dream job. And that's the kind of shit I love. Magic Mike XXL lovingly corrects the many and varied mistakes of the first film in order to actually make the thing good. Not good in an Oscars sense, obviously, but good in the sense that it's a fucking joy to watch. When I first watched XXL, I left the cinema in a kind of excited euphoria, not fully processing what I'd just seen, but elated nonetheless. I rewatched it about 5 times trying to write this, and it took me about a week longer to write than I said it would because I kept getting sidetracked by how much I loved particular moments and calling people in an ecstatic daze, please, watch Magic Mike XXL, it's a masterpiece. And that's not something I ever thought I would say about a movie that's ostensibly about how much ladies love muscled up dudes who can snap their hips in time with a bass line. So, without further ado, let's see if I can justify my love of this film, or whether me attempting to do so accidentally unlocks something embedded deep in my psyche and I have yet another crisis about my sexual orientation. It's been a few years, I'm probably overdue. Anyway, the first iteration of Magic Mike was marketed as this raucous, sexy dramedy featuring buff dudes in the buff. Something for the ladies, you know? To give you a brief rundown of the plot, Channing Tatum plays the titular Mike, who works dozens of odd jobs to bankroll his dream of eventually making his own furniture. His most lucrative role is at a strip club called Exquisite, which is run by a semi-retired southern stripper/hustler named Dallas, who is played by Matthew McConaughey. Dallas is constantly assuring Mike that he'll give him equity in the exquisite business when they finally take it from Tampa to Miami. While this is happening, Mike links up with Adam, who is a 19-year-old he convinces to work at the club under the stage name The Kid. Adam ends up on drugs and in debt, and everything eventually goes off the rails. The film ends with Mike quitting the stripping business to settle down with the kid's sister and pursue his furniture dream. When this film launched, critics seemed to really froth over two things. The first was that the film had a plot. Now, I know you're thinking, Alex, most films have at least a little bit of a plot. It's a visual storytelling medium. And you're right, but I think this film's possession of a plot may have been a surprise to critics because on the whole, we're not really used to seeing strippers as anything more than like set dressing in most mainstream cinema. A guy goes to a club, a faceless ass bounces in the background. Murder victim working as a dancer is found in her heels and club wear. Dancer sitting on a male protagonist's lap is shooed away so that the action can happen. That sort of thing. Beyond that, we're not really used to seeing male strippers at all, and certainly not male heterosexual strippers designed for women. So I think when it turned out that Steven Soderbergh, a director of quality and prestige, you can't see me, I'm doing air quotes with my fingers again. When it turned out that he was attached to the project and that it wouldn't necessarily be some sort of like mid-tier sex comedy, they immediately, and incorrectly, assumed that it was kind of good. The second thing that critics seemed to really get into was that the film was somehow finally letting women see the things they wanted to see on screen. Finally, they said, women can have what they've always wanted. Hold on, let me check my notes. Yes. The thing women want most in the world. Beefcake and knockoff army uniforms humping their faces. Women are empowered by being able to see this. It's a revelation to them. And look, I'm not denying that there are women who love that. And while I would maybe invite them to interrogate why they think the American war machine is worth sexualizing, I'm not here to judge anyone's love of beefcake. To each their own. But was this an empowering moment that catered specifically to women? I don't think so. And I think that this was the ultimate disservice that Magic Mike did to itself and to the audience. For a start, Magic Mike is so caught up in the drama element of its dramedy genre that it completely fails to make use of the whole male stripper setting for any of the sexual value that the film was allegedly carrying. And when it tries, it completely fails to understand what sexy would actually look like in this setting. This film is written and directed by men, and I think there's something about the way that men view women's bodies in these kinds of settings that they assume has some sort of one-for-one value when translating it back for a female audience. And it's that kind of like, I wish I could see some casual full-frontal female nudity, like visual logic, that gives us an extended scene near the beginning of Magic Mike where the very large penis belonging to the character of Big Dick Ritchie is just in a penis pump in the foreground of the shot while a conversation happens in the background. Now, look, I realize that there are people who might have some sort of admiration for the penis in a sexual setting, but outside of like niche porn, I genuinely struggle to envision a world where a woman's vision of like ideal male cinematic sexuality involves a semi-flaccid penis stuffed in a cylinder being worked on like some kind of deflated bike tire. Like, no one is begging for that mash of leftover skin to be the star of the show. And I'd probably latch onto that example less if it was being played for more comedic value, but it's not even funny. It's just a penis in a penis pump. When the film does finally get to the dancing portion, which we would assume would be the thing that would be sexy and is also the best bit of any movie that's just about dancing, it's shot in a way that completely removes any fantasy element for the audience. We actually see the dancers from the perspective of those on stage rather than as paying audience members or even like intimate insiders getting slow pans over muscles. Which would make sense if the film was doing something like Showgirls where the adulation of the audience is key to the plot, but it isn't. So we're left with scenes that do nothing for the alleged sex appeal of the film and nothing for the plot. This problem is further compounded when you realize that despite being given brief glimpses of the gang of weirdos that make up Exquisite's Kings of Tampa male strip show, we never truly get to learn anything about them. You don't really see them dance, and we don't see their personality at all. It's a sex comedy that isn't sexy or funny, and a drama that isn't dramatic. So broadly speaking, those are the things that I think are wrong with Magic Mike. But it's actually extremely difficult to talk about why the first film is so vastly outstripped by its successor without talking about some of the things that make XXL really great. Partially because, by all rights, neither of them should be worth talking about at all. Magic Mike XXL picks up a few years after the events of Magic Mike. Mike is less magical. His furniture business has taken off enough that he has an employee, but not one that he can afford health insurance for. His girlfriend has left him, but he's still pretty charming. On his way back from work, he gets a call that Dallas has died, and when he shows up to the funeral, he finds a party instead. Dallas isn't actually dead, but he has abandoned his now aging dance troupe, taken the kid, and left for Macau. Not to be deterred, the lads just really wanted to see Mike on their way through to the annual Myrtle Beach stripper convention, where they intend to have one last hurrah before pursuing their other passions. After hearing Pony by Genuine play on the radio and having a little sexy dance by himself in his workshop, Mike realizes that he actually loves the boys and stripping, and he decides to join them on their final trip. We follow them on their fun little jaunt across the country, while they learn to shed the remains of Dallas's tired act and perform sexy dances that reflect who they are. It is, to be absolutely frank with you, a totally absurd plot, but by God, does it work hard for its money. First of all, the band of weirdos that we barely get to touch in the first film are front and center in XXL. They are, in order, Ken, a sensitive hippie type who's a Reiki healer, yoga master, and wannabe actor; Tito, an enthusiastic hunk with a passion for artisanal frozen yogurt; Tarzan, an aging war veteran with bad knees and an artistic side; Big Dick Richie, who loves the Backstreet Boys, has a fear of fire and a penis so large he has trouble finding a lady to sleep with him; and Tobias, their MC, driver, and DJ, and Tito's partner in yogurt. They are an extremely odd group, but also somehow manage to be exactly what you think of when you think of male Floridian strippers. And they're all complemented by Channing Tatum's Mike, who remains extremely charismatic and a vital piece to the group's success. Once the film manages to establish that these are individuals with personalities and relationships to each other, and not just like a collection of sexy doll parts being used as a backdrop for a coming-of-age addiction drama, it actually starts to establish itself as something beautiful. It's a road trip movie in the most classic sense of the word. Now, I'm not going to say anything about like journeys versus destinations, because that's too large of a cliche even for me. But we all know that a good road trip movie is about friendship and is also a little bit homoerotic. I wrote that sentence. I don't know if the last part is actually true, but fuck it. It's my podcast. I'm running with it. The point is, in recentering friendship as the key to this film about a car trip to a stripping convention, Magic Mike XXL is already leagues ahead of its predecessor in understanding sexuality and sensuality. I'll give you an example. There are spoilers here, but it's been out for like 4 years now, you know? Anyway, the lads are in a van on their way to the convention and are mid-argument about whether to keep Dallas's tired routines after his betrayal or whether to do something from the heart. In the middle of this argument, they decide to take MDMA. One hard cut later, and the boys are throwing their costumes out the window of the moving van while Mike massages Big Dick Richie's shoulders and tells him he never has to do the fireman routine again. If you will recall, Big Dick Richie is scared of fire and has never liked the routine. But what will Big Dick Richie do now? He feels lost without the guidance of the existing routines. When they pull into a service station, the gang, all of whom are now higher than God, cheer Richie on to self-actualization. "You're not a fireman, Richie, you're a fucking male entertainer." And they convince Richie to use his newfound belief in himself to make the female service station attendant smile. And he goes out there and he gives it his all, armed only with a pack of Cheetos, rock-hard abs, and the Backstreet Boys. He bumps and he grinds until she finally beams at him. And when he's successful, all of them celebrate like it's a Super Bowl touchdown. They're high, but they're also genuinely happy that Richie understands the positives within himself. This is as much about friendship as it is about Richie's sculpted, gyrating body. Where Magic Mike believes that Matthew McConaughey's writhing torso or Channing Tatum's bouncing ass are the be-all and end-all of audience pleasure, Magic Mike XXL understands that layering that against friendship, care, and communication actually deepens that pleasure and makes it relatable and enduring. XXL spends just as much time having the characters sprawled in bed next to each other talking like it's a sleepover as it does having male asses in G-strings wiggle about, if not more time. Which brings me to my second point. XXL understands that it is catering largely to a female audience, and it takes a lot of care to make sure that every single woman in the film, from Amber Heard's leading lady all the way down to the 900-odd female extras they used, are treated as unique and valued. They're never a punchline. And that shouldn't be so unusual that I noticed it immediately, but I really did. One of the moments that I found really off-putting in the first Magic Mike film involved Big Dick Richie lifting a slightly heavier woman as part of a routine. He throws his back out when he does it, and he has to stop, leaving the woman sort of confused standing on stage. The implication is that she was so heavy she became an occupational hazard. Now, Richie is played capably by Joe... I'm going to fuck up his name again, but I'll do it anyway. I'm going to plow through. Richie is played capably by Joe Manganiello, who is just enormous. He's 6'5" and all muscle. I struggle to believe that there's anything that he couldn't sort of lift fairly easily, let alone a woman whose main crime seems to be that she has a muffin top. Compare that to XXL, which has multiple extended scenes in which larger women, genuinely plus-size ladies, are treated not only like people, but like the lead characters in the fantasy that these men are selling. Their bodies aren't a joke. They're sung to, praised, and flirted with just as much as their skinnier counterparts. And yes, one of them gets lifted, as in literally swept off her feet. But it's not just women's presence that governs this behavior. Even without women on screen, even when it's just talk with the boys, the chatter is respectful, bordering on reverent. When Andre, a singer and stripper played by Donald Glover, is talking to Ken, who's played by Matt Bomer, about work and his singing career, he says that even if his EP blew up, he'd still strip on the side because, and I'm quoting here, girls have to deal with men in their lives who don't listen to them. They don't ask what they want. All we do is ask them. And when they tell you, it's a beautiful thing. We're like healers. This line is delivered without a woman on screen. They're not there to impress anybody. They're just talking about work and why they like it. It's a totally ridiculous line delivered completely earnestly and purely for audience enjoyment. And it nails it. It really serves to deepen the fantasy that XXL is selling. It's also worth noting that even though it has a female lead, there's actually no romance subplot in Magic Mike XXL. Amber Heard Zoe briefly flirts with Mike, but then she tells him that she's not in a boy phase, which he politely respects, and then spends the rest of the film just becoming her friend. In trying to cheer her up after a man breaks her heart, he invites her to the stripping convention in Myrtle Beach to get her smile back. And he says, "Strippers bring smiles aplenty. And failing that, there'll be 3,000 women there since you're not in a boy phase." They don't kiss, and this feels like a really conscious decision, not only in respect to her own sexual orientation, but also in respect to the actual job that Mike is doing. He invites Zoe on stage as one of the lucky ladies during his final strip scene, and a kiss would be breaking the role of audience attendee. But he does cheerfully tell her that it looks like her smile has returned. And he's right. It's intimate and sweet, and the perfect finale for a film that's ultimately about ensuring that its female audience feels valued as whole people. There's a really good video essay on the website Film School Rejects, and it says, Magic Mike XXL's strengths come from its willingness to be earnestly devoted to its audience's pleasure, however silly or crude that pleasure might seem to judgmental observers. Where Magic Mike failed as a film, Magic Mike XXL corrected earnestly and with real care for its subjects. And that's why it was completely worth me getting yelled at about stale popcorn. Well, that's it. I could probably talk about Magic Mike XXL for like literal hours. I feel like I've written my usual essay. It's actually longer than it would normally be. And it's still barely scratched the surface of everything that I love about this film. I didn't even get to talk about the power of Channing Tatum's commitment to voguing, or Andie MacDowell's stint as the milfy southern size queen who finally beds Big Dick Ritchie. So if you want to go through this film scene by scene with me, come find me at the pub. Please. I'm begging.